Hello, dear listener. Please subscribe to our channel. Enjoy watching. Girza cautiously poked his head out from cover. The helicopter still circled with invisibility, clearly attempting to spot its next target. Before he could determine where the bright lightning had struck towards the rotary winged machine, it became clear. It was easy to see how the missile pierced the hull and became embedded in the plating. Moments later, the sound of an explosion reached Girza. The ignited helicopter flung against the rocky plateau, tossed several times before sliding down the slope, breaking apart as it collided with the rocks. Finally, the machine crashed into the gorge, and the echo of a deafening explosion reached him. The question of whether the pilot survived didn't arise. A ringing silence followed, yet Girza knew that the enemy was nearby, lying in wait. He tossed a small stone aside. Immediately, a gunshot sounded, and a bullet hit a few meters away, scattering splinters of rock. However, the fighter managed to discern the source of the gunfire. Just then, a cloud covered the moon, casting pitch darkness upon the plateau. Like a snake slipping between the stones, he approached the lurking enemy closely, frozen in place, very much resembling a real Girza before a lethal strike. In his right hand, he gripped a tactical knife. It would have been easy, without fuss, to shoot the bandit, but Girza wanted to feel the enemy's last breath, his departing soul. Inhaling the cold mountain air deeply, he darted swiftly towards the man lying with his back turned, simultaneously delivering a fatal blow straight into the heart. The gangster had no time to comprehend anything and practically offered no resistance. After restraining the twitching body several times, Girza wiped the knife on the enemy's jacket and fell silent. The moon reappeared, indifferently illuminating the battlefield. Girza tilted his head and ran his hand over his neck. Yes, there was blood, but his head didn't hurt, meaning the impact was just a graze, scratches notwithstanding. He got to his feet, adjusted his gear, slipped his hand into the breast pocket of his jacket, and found the textured grip of his pistol. He returned the knife to its place and looked around, orienting himself using the slightly snow-covered rocks. Girza slowly moved down the gentle, albeit occasionally steep slope. The weather was deteriorating, and a gust of cold wind struck. Lead-colored clouds securely concealed the frightened moon, and a fine, annoying rain began to fall. Enveloped in the damp mist, Girza pulled his hood over his head and slowly descended into the valley. Suddenly, the deteriorating weather was opportune. In such conditions, bandits were unlikely to display heightened vigilance. And what vigilance could there be when one is facing a skilled and determined fighter like Girza? When one can't see a thing just 3 meters away, an alarm clock rang simultaneously, accompanied by the beep of a laptop. An email had arrived. Stretching, I leisurely slid off the couch and glanced at the monitor. All right, the final transaction went through successfully. The funds securely settled in my account, while only a little left to go. Bid a fond farewell to my wife and her father, and smoothly vanish into a new life. These thoughts lifted my spirits. Humming something by the Beatles, I shuffled across the cold floor in my old slippers and entered the bathroom. I stared at myself in the mirror for a while. The question of shaving didn't arise. My 3-day stubble fit well with my image. I brushed my teeth and scratched my hairy chest. Really, I looked like a monkey. But women enjoy burying their faces in my curly hair. I don't know what they find appealing about it, but it's their call. I emptied the remains of the expensive cologne onto my closely cropped head, slipped on a stretched-out undershirt. Returned to the computer. The cell phone next to it was ringing insistently. No worries, the world can wait while I get dressed. I put on a nearly black jacket over the undershirt, slipped into black jeans, went to the mirror. A complete image. A loser in all his glory. Good enough. Again, like a wailing siren, the cell phone screeched. Vitalik, where have you disappeared to? I've been worried. My wife squawked like a hen fussing over her eggs. An interesting metaphor, fully reflecting Larissa's essence. What happened? I genuinely couldn't care less about her. In an hour, there's a board of directors meeting. Dad wants you to be there. Guilt-ridden notes crept into Larissa's voice. Hope you haven't forgotten that I don't work at your company. I even yawned. She's so predictable. Darling, I'm not serious. Larissa rushed to chatter as if afraid I'd hang up. I'll think about it. I disconnected. I settled into the car and calmly drove off the factory premises. I needed something to eat. I stopped at a small cafe, forgotten by the Ministry of Food Industry. The neon sign was missing 2 letters, giving the place a mysteriously glamorous touch. I pushed the entrance door open and was engulfed in the characteristic aroma of a public eatery. The plump waitress, lost in her thoughts, took my order, and I settled in a corner, waiting for my coffee. But before I could fully immerse myself in the ambience, the annoying phone buzzed. Talik, a woman called you multiple times. She asked for your mobile number. The department secretary where I dedicatedly worked until recently spoke in a well-modulated voice. Who's the woman? What demands is she making? I almost laughed. Victoria Chikina. She says it's regarding a personal matter. There was curiosity in the secretary's voice. Give her my mobile. My mood had soured. The woman's surname meant nothing to me. But her first name. Upon entering the boarding school, I found myself in a different world. Wonderland, one against all. I was beaten whenever there was a chance, without bothering with reasons. Nights were particularly tough. I genuinely feared sleep. They would often organize dark sessions for me. They would throw a blanket over me and hit me wherever they pleased. Asking for protection from the teachers or supervisors was useless. Gradually, the spring of my character tightened. One day, during recess, they dragged me into an empty classroom and began their disciplinary session. But something went wrong. I pulled out a shiv I had crafted from an old file during the manual labor class and swung with all my might, hitting one of the disciplinary staff in the thigh. Blood gushed out like from a pig. I struck another in the shoulder. The shiv went in up to the hilt. The opponent groaned something and dropped out of the action. Dealing with the third was quite simple. I kicked him in the crotch with the heel of my heavy government-issue boot. He screamed a stream of profanities and clutched his groin with both hands. I knocked him to the floor and began methodically kicking him, trying to aim for his face. Teachers rushed in at the sound of the cries and witnessed a scene worthy of a horror movie. A pool of blood and a screaming imbecile. After that, things got interesting. Police, stern men and women, but they couldn't manage to put me behind bars. Too young, they gave me a stern talking to and let me off. They even let me stay at the boarding school. The reputation of being a psycho stuck with me. They left me alone and I began to live as if in space, not interacting with anyone. There was an intriguing character at the boarding school, who worked as a watchman and janitor. He wore a camouflage jacket and had a prosthetic leg instead of his left. But he wasn't disheartened. Merrily humming something, he swept the schoolyard serving as the night watchman. He lived at the boarding school in a tiny basement room. Alone. That's who I connected with. He would enthrall me with stories about life. About Africa, about exotic countries he had visited. I listened to him with my mouth agape. But as I grew up, I began to doubt. It seemed to me that my adult friend was pulling the wool over my eyes. Nevertheless, I would still go to his room in the evenings. We'd brew tea and he'd tell me another story. He never talked about his personal life. Sometimes in the middle of a story he would fall silent for a few minutes. His face would become stern, his cheekbones would sharply stand out, and my friend would become somewhat alien, unfamiliar. Then it would pass and he'd return to his usual state. Once, during one of those moments, he said to me, "Remember, kid, for a man, honor is paramount. Don't be afraid of defeat. Honor is paramount. Don't be afraid of defeat. It's temporary. You'll have your time. But if you lose your honor, you'll never get it back, no matter how hard you try. And remember, there are concepts like love and loyalty. They're not separate things. Love is loyalty. There's no love without loyalty." My friend sighed and began telling something cheerful. He died when I was in my final year. They buried him with little pomp at the military cemetery. They fired shots over the grave and played the anthem. Silent people in military uniforms stood around, sternly looking at the grieving woman in black. I distinctly remember the little pillows with numerous medals and the ceremonial cap pinned to the lid of the coffin. An hour later, Girza emerged onto a barely noticeable mountain trail. After walking a few dozen meters, he decided to take a break when he heard the sound of footsteps and someone's conversation around the bend. A group of people were coming along the trail, and he realized that besides the bandits, no one else could be walking here. Girza pulled out his stekin and took a step aside, but it was too late. They spotted him. There were 4 of them. 3 seemed to be locals. 2 were around 20 years old, the third a bit older, presumably their leader. The fourth person, dressed in rags, through which one could see a long neglected body with hands tied behind her back, was being led on a rope looped around her neck. They stopped, exchanging bewildered glances upon seeing an unfamiliar man in faded camouflage. "Stop," ordered the eldest. He was about 5 meters away, standing with his left side facing Girza, an automatic rifle held against his chest. The other 2 stood a bit farther back, clearly relying entirely on their commander. Girza squeezed the trigger twice. The 9mm bullets penetrated the Mujahideen's coat. He was thrown backward, dropping his rifle, which clattered against the rocks. One of the young men spun around and was thrown to the side. He fell face down across the pedestrian path, choking on his own blood. The bullet had hit his throat. Girza raised his pistol again and fired several shots. One of the bullets hit the Mujahideen between the eyes. Girza lowered his pistol and searched for the bound woman with his eyes. "Come here," he beckoned with his right hand, which still held the gun. "Don't be afraid." She cautiously approached. It was evident that she was shivering with fear and cold. But it seemed she was more afraid of disobeying orders. Girza hid the gun in his jacket pocket and pulled out a knife. "Turn around," he said, quickly cutting the ropes. "Who are you?" She recoiled back as if expecting a blow and remained silent. Maybe she didn't understand English. I recognized the woman immediately. Mother had not changed at all. The same well-groomed face, with a perpetual expression of discontent. A slender body, bronzed from the efforts of masseuses. She paused and scanned the hall in search of me. "Mom, I'm here." I stood up from the table and raised my hand. "Vitalik," she said skeptically, peering at my face. "You've changed so much." Apparently my appearance disappointed her. Her eyes caught my t-shirt and jeans. "What do you want from me?" I cut to the chase, skipping pleasantries. My mother took out a handkerchief and wiped away tears. Wow, she can cry, I thought. Jean is very sick. She urgently needs a bone marrow transplant. My mother looked at me with teary eyes. "Only you can help her. She needs your biomaterial. I beg you, please help." She was almost sobbing. For some reason, I remembered the girl in the revealing outfit, disdainfully tossing a candy at my feet, and the indifferent back of her mother behind the closing door of the boarding school. I couldn't think straight. I stood up silently and left the cafe. The door of my Lexus closed quietly. The shocked expression on my mother, who had followed me outside, was the last thing I saw in the rearview mirror of my car. Girza picked up the Mujahideen's rifle. He looked around. Another rifle was lying a little to the side. He pulled it by the strap and took it in his hands. He detached the fully loaded magazine. He pulled the bolt several times. It cycled smoothly. He removed the top cover of the receiver. The spring and gas piston were lubricated. Apparently this AKM hadn't been fired in a long time. Girza attached the cover and magazine back in place. He pulled 2 more loaded magazines from the pouches of the commander lying on his back and put them into his pouch. "Should be enough." He looked at the woman. She was sitting crouched down, afraid to move. Girza took out a chocolate bar. "Eat." Then, after a moment's thought, he took a warm jacket from one of the bandits and threw it to the woman. "Put it on," he said. She obediently put on the jacket. They needed to leave quickly. Gunshots in the mountains could be heard from far away. Perhaps a group of armed men was rushing there to seek revenge. Girza slung the rifle over his shoulder and gently nudged the reluctant companion. "Let's go." He thought that the rebels probably didn't walk all the way on foot. Most likely they came by car. That means there's a road somewhere below. And most likely, their vehicle is hidden there as well. They probably bought or stole the woman and were taking her to their village. The customs here are simple to the point of madness. Might makes right here, and whoever has the gun is right. After half an hour, they reached the road. On one side, the road pressed against the cliffs, while on the other side, the sound of a mountain river echoed from the depths of the gorge. As they approached, a white Toyota with rust spots was parked near the cliffs. The doors were open and the key was still in the ignition. Just as it should be. Who would fear theft here? Everyone is kin, everyone knows each other. Girza plopped down in the front seat, throwing the rifle to the back. He swung open the right door. "Get in," he motioned to her. He hadn't figured out if she understood English, but she followed his command correctly. The woman obediently sat in the front seat. Girza started the engine, turned the car around, and headed towards what he believed was a government military checkpoint. It became pitch dark, but Girza didn't rush to turn on the headlights. The moon occasionally emerged from behind the clouds, dimly illuminating the road. The car was moving slowly. He felt as if he was creeping along, ready for any unexpected events. They drove for a while. Gradually, dawn began to break. Instead of the nighttime darkness, a sticky gray fog enveloped the road. Girza stopped the car and opened the door, listening carefully. A dog was barking somewhere up ahead. Most likely, there's a settlement there. Usually a checkpoint is located at the entrance. He needed to leave the car and proceed on foot. Girza gestured to the woman, indicating that she should get out of the car. Then, he grabbed his rifle and started walking along the road. He didn't look back. Knowing that the woman wouldn't lag behind, visibility was almost zero, and he stumbled over a concrete slab lying across the road. Clearly a checkpoint was ahead. He shouted a few times, hesitating to fire. Who knows, they might open fire recklessly. Someone responded to him in the local language. He remembered a few words and managed to explain who he was. Two soldiers appeared out of the fog, each armed with rifles. Girza placed his AKM on the concrete and raised his hands. At that moment, a loud thud sounded behind him. Something heavy and hot struck his back. For Girza, everything around him plunged into a viscous, sticky darkness. A knock sounded on the compartment door. "We're arriving," the voice of the conductor seemed to echo right by his ear. Girza opened his eyes. The suburbs of a big city had already begun outside the window. It was nearly dawn. Raindrops, smeared by the wind and speed, danced in a circle on the glass. There was no one else in the compartment. The fellow passengers had probably disembarked during the night. Girza squinted and smiled. The doors of the neighboring compartment slammed shut. Girza dressed leisurely, fastened his prosthetic leg, picked up his bag of belongings, looked around to make sure he hadn't forgotten anything, and stepped out into the narrow corridor of the sleeper car. The train slowly pulled under the glass roof of the old station. Finally, with a slight jolt, it came to a stop. The conductors quickly lowered the steps and wiped the handrails. People slowly started emerging from the train cars. Girza descended onto the platform, holding onto the handrails and limping slightly as he made his way toward the exit. A chilly northern wind blew and sent a heap of yellow fallen leaves swirling toward him. Suddenly, Girza felt an inexplicable unease, as if the wind wanted to warn him about something. He flicked his cigarette butt into a bin and, slightly limping, headed toward the bus stop. Girza climbed up to the 4th floor and used his key to open the apartment door. The murmurs of a television could be heard from somewhere deep inside. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Girza took off his bag and walked into the kitchen. 2 cups with unfinished coffee stood on the table. For a moment, it seemed as if Vera would walk into the kitchen any second now, and everything would be as it used to be. From the bedroom, Girza heard a rustling noise. He cautiously cracked open the door and froze at the sight. His wife was on her knees in front of a naked, unfamiliar man, moving her head rhythmically. A picture-perfect scene, as Comrade Gosman used to say. The man placed his hand on the back of Vera's head, setting the right rhythm and controlling her movements. He sat with closed eyes, his chin lifted in a blissful moan. Vera was fully engrossed, giving herself entirely to her beloved activity. Smacking and slurping with enthusiasm. It was a vivid example of a strong gender-blind partnership between 2 understanding partners. Girza stood there for a while, observing the erotic scene with interest. Then he returned to the corridor, rummaged through his bag, pulled out a flashbang grenade, and carefully approached the bedroom. He didn't hesitate for a moment. There were enemies in the bedroom, and they had to be treated as enemies. Girza extended the fuse and pulled out the pin. He cracked the door slightly and tossed the grenade toward the bed. Lost in their oral ecstasy, the partners paid no attention to him. Girza managed to close the door just in time before a loud bang echoed, followed by a blinding flash. After a moment, a piercing male scream could be heard. When Girza returned to the bedroom, he saw Vera lying unconscious on the floor, with the severed dignity of her lover in her mouth. She always had good teeth, Girza thought, with a touch of pride. The lover himself, clutching his bloodied groin with his hands, was crumpled near the bed, groaning loudly. Oblivious to his surroundings, he hadn't yet recovered from the shock of pain. Girza, careful not to step on the bloody stains, picked up the remains of the grenade, walked back to the corridor, retrieved a guitar from the closet, a gift from his mother, grabbed his bag, and quickly left the apartment. When he got into a taxi, he was confident that no one had seen him. 6 months after my friend's funeral, I was summoned to the director's office at the orphanage. Vicente Pavlovich chewed his lips for a long time, then turned to a stranger sitting at a small table. "This is Vitalik." The director stood up and left me alone with the stranger. "Well, hello there, the one himself, Vitalik." He extended his hand toward me. The handshake was firm and manly. "I'm called, but who cares what my name is?" The man smirked. "Yura asked me to pass this to you." He pulled a guitar case from behind the chair, and then placed a set of keys on the table. "These are for the motorcycle in the garage. Here are the documents." The stranger pushed a leather wallet toward me. "You'll figure it out." Then he took a plastic card out of his breast pocket. "These are some funds. Count them when you can. The PIN code is 4 ones." The man stood up. "Don't grieve, everything will be fine for you." He patted me on the shoulder and left the office. When I arrived at my father-in-law's company office, I clung to the hope that I wouldn't be allowed in. However, I was met by the head of the security department himself, who promptly escorted me to the conference room. As I entered, the whole gang was already gathered. My father-in-law looked at me with disapproval, but didn't say a word. I took a seat by the wall, displaying an air of indifference to those assembled. After all, I was not a member of the board of directors in any way. And until then, I had no idea what they wanted from me. The main agenda of the board of directors meeting was the transfer of company management to my wife, Larissa. Her father retained control over the company but was handing a portion of the shares to his daughter. No one took me into account. My opinion wasn't considered. After a while, everyone dispersed, leaving only my wife and father-in-law. "Vitalik, it's time to talk." My father-in-law got straight to the point. He saw that I handed over the company to Larissa. "She wants to appoint Vadim as the manager. You know him. It's her prerogative. She wants a divorce from you. I understand you have 2 children, but there's nothing to be done. You will pay child support and participate in their upbringing as best you can." My father-in-law glanced at Larissa. She sat silently, not turning her head in my direction. "So that's how it is. Fine. I don't think there will be a problem with raising the children." I placed 2 documents with imposing coat of arms stamps in front of my father-in-law. "What's this?" He picked them up and attempted to read the results of DNA paternity tests. "None of the children are mine. It's probably best if their biological father takes care of raising them." I looked pointedly at Larissa. "Is that Vadim, dear?" She flinched at the question and blushed. "I filed for divorce. You'll be left with nothing, with your backside bare. My lawyers will bleed you dry like a leech." My wife's pretty face contorted with a grimace. She was nearly shouting with anger as if waiting for the right moment. 2 young men entered the conference room. "These are our lawyers. They will handle the divorce." My father-in-law wiped his sweaty forehead with a handkerchief, as if he had been fearing something all this time. Damn, they surrounded me from all sides. I tried to contain my emotions. "Mr. Lerman, your spouse has filed a petition for divorce and property division. If you wish, you can invite your own lawyer." One of the young men smirked. "So be it," he continued. "We represent your wife's interests in her divorce case against you. We thought maybe we can reach a private settlement instead of battling it out in court. Are you absolutely sure you don't want to bring your lawyer?" "Why bother? I have no intention of contesting anything," I said, looking at my father-in-law. Poor guy, he broke into a sweat. "I don't get what he's afraid of." The lawyer took a voice recorder out of his briefcase. "Would you mind if I record our conversation?" I didn't mind, but I immediately pressed the button on a small device in my pocket. "Let's determine your assets, Mr. Lerman." The lawyer looked at my wife. "According to your wife, you have 2 cars, a bike, the house where you live with your wife and children, as well as bank accounts. The bike and the house were mine before the marriage." I tried to speak calmly. "We're aware of that, but over the years of cohabitation, your wife contributed money for the motorcycle's repair and correspondingly for the house. There are corresponding documents for this." The lawyer handed me a pile of receipts. "Oh, Larissa, she thought of everything. So she had decided to cheat me long ago. The thing is, neither the house nor the bike are mine. They belong to a friend. I'm merely using them. Your wife believes that both the house and the bike belong to you. At least you never claimed otherwise over the years of your shared life. What she thinks doesn't matter much. I thought for almost 15 years that she loved me too, and look where that got me. Concealing assets is a crime." The lawyer took off his glasses and began wiping them. "I suppose you've checked the house and the bike and confirmed that they belong to someone else?" "A friend of mine, who kindly allows me to live in his house and ride his motorcycle." "Can you name the owner?" "Unfortunately, I don't know. But I would advise against bothering him too much. He's quite nervous." I looked sympathetically at the lawyers. "All right, but can you confirm the presence of the cars?" The lawyer was losing his self-assurance right before my eyes. If my dear wife had bothered to check, she would have found that I don't own a single car. They all belong to the Special Forces Veterans Association. I just use and maintain them. Nevertheless, we would like to clarify more precisely. Who do your cars belong to? My eyes turned to ice. I stared at the lawyer for a moment. "Do you really want answers to your questions?" I asked coldly. The room fell silent. The lawyer looked questioningly at my father-in-law. It seems this idiot got too carried away. I wouldn't advise prying into the association with such questions. They don't take too kindly to the overly curious. I smiled kindly. My father-in-law hung his head, looking at the floor. It seemed to me that he was beginning to understand something. "Remember that our conversation is being recorded." One of the lawyers picked up the voice recorder, rewound the tape, and pressed play. White noise emanated from the built-in speaker. I took a small box out of my pocket. It is a very convenient device that can jam all video and audio devices within a 50-meter radius. I found it amusing and looked at Larissa. "You won't get anything, dear," I said. "I wouldn't rush into court if I were you. There's still a particle of love for you left in me somewhere. But if I were in your shoes, I'd try my best to avoid crossing paths with me again." I looked at my sweaty father-in-law. "I'm leaving, and I recommend leaving me alone. Don't create problems for yourselves." I stood up and headed for the exit. But as I approached the door, 2 security guards stepped in. For some reason I wasn't surprised. Life doesn't teach fools anything. Before anyone could react, 2 young guards almost simultaneously collapsed to the floor, knocking down a pair of chairs in the process. Who else wants to take the risk? I scanned those around me. It seemed no one was eager. Catching a surprised and shocked look from Larissa, I swiftly made my way towards the elevators. Idiots, I thought to myself. I can already imagine their faces tomorrow morning when they discover their empty accounts. I brushed off the leaves carried by the wind and carefully placed a bouquet of scarlet carnations on the black granite slab. The cemetery was quiet. Even the autumn wind seemed to make an effort not to disturb the departed. I couldn't leave without saying goodbye to my friend. For a while I stood there silently, gazing at the marble obelisk with a star through tearful eyes. "Men cry too," I whispered. "Rest in peace, brother. May the earth be soft for you, Girza." The motorcycle started with a half-turn, and soon the gray ribbon of the road was rolling under its wheels. Fields, freshly harvested, and the green forest with patches of red and yellow leaves rushed past on both sides. I knew exactly where I was headed. The path was one towards the sun. A donation of $10 million has been made to the Republican Children's Oncology Clinic. The name of the sponsor could not be determined. If you enjoyed this story, please like and leave a comment. It's important for us and will help promote this video. Thank you for watching us.